The Pick of Destiny brought Tony Iommi, Ozzy Osbourne, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward together in some mystical, magical way. And somehow inspired by the film of the same name, they decided to christen the band Black Sabbath. Despite tons of acid, cocaine, and alcohol, one member even surviving cancer, all 4 members are still alive, and 3 members are still together today, touring under the same name. And also despite many different lineups. This is my Black Sabbath collection, and I want to run through it for you guys, and to keep it interesting, I brought along a few friends to help me along the way. I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm a big fan and have some thoughts and some really cool pressings I want to show you. So stay along for the ride. This is going to be a 2-part video, so please come back next week for part 2, as I'll have more guest appearances from vinyl community members, and then also a really close friend of mine from here in Columbus, Ohio. I like history and I like music history. And looking back, we can clearly see that there was a race for heavy in the late 60s, just like there was a race for first flight back when the Wright brothers created their innovative aircraft and were the first in flight. I see that as being Black Sabbath's first album, getting credit for the first in flight in heavy metal. No matter who documented it, they get the credit for it. And not only did they pretty much invent heavy metal, they also influenced many bands and many genres to come afterwards, including doom and stoner.
Black Sabbath, to me, are the epitome of metal, the godfathers of metal, if you will. They brought in that new sound that was so different at the time, so much that it even scared a lot of people when they first heard, the opening to the first album, Black Sabbath. But Tony Iommi's riffs, they're so legendary, and their signature. You know it's Tony Iommi when you hear those riffs. Geezer Butler, an amazing bass player. I mean, the guy is just all over the fretboard on all those songs. Of course, a lot of the classic intros like NIB are a perfect example. Bill Ward, monster on the drum kit. Another guy that's full of energy, all the stuff he plays. And I mean, he was doing some stuff back then that still today is better than a lot of the stuff that you hear today. And playing with one bass drum compared to 2. And then of course Ozzy, another, signature sound. Everyone knows Ozzy's voice. It's such a unique sounding voice. No one else sounds just like him. When you put all that together, it's just like the perfect recipe for a metal album.
Well, there was nothing like it back in those days. I mean, it was the end of the Beatles era, and it was the end of the Flower Power era, and it was a brand new sound. There was nothing like it back in those days. And it started a whole new genre of music, and it just took off from there.
Released almost 50 years ago, this album still holds up for me today. And if I play the first track, I'll get chills up my back right now, just like I did the first time I heard it. I wasn't there when it released, so I invited my good friend Captain to come over. We've known each other for over 15 years, but he has some memories to share about when the album first came out.
I made my first acquaintance with him in 1970, I believe it was. We had a session in my English class when I was in high school about you'd bring an album in and you'd explain to the class the lyrics. And this kid brought this one in, and that was played, and we listened to it for a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. It was immediately shut down, and the kid was sent off to the principal's office because mother was called and he was sent home. That's how underground that stuff was in those days. Of course, I'd never heard nothing like it. I was immediately captivated by it, and I went out a couple weeks later and got it was an 8-track of it. It was on the 8-track days, and that's how I got my start with Sabbath.
Sab's second album, Paranoid, releases the same year as their debut. Despite not getting much airplay on US radio, but selling a lot of copies because of word of mouth and the waves it was making in the underground. My friend Eli volunteered some of his time to make a video to share some of his comments on one of his favorite Sab albums.
Paranoid, as well as all the other albums, always be playing them. This album has been my favorite Sabbath album, since the first time I've heard it. Of course, there's such legendary staples on there as Paranoid, Iron Man, but I mean, really the whole album itself is a great listen. Iron Man, of course, such a classic. I mean, one of the top 5 got to be best songs of all time, let alone metal songs. Something, you know, the intro, just the plain kick drum, just something about that is just so iconic. Even though it's so simple, it just still something about it. Even it just gives it kind of an ominous type of tone to it. And you always knew, you know, what was coming next was just going to be gritty and heavy. Planet Caravan, another great, total mellow trip out song. To me, when I first heard the track, I didn't even think it was Ozzy singing because it completely doesn't even sound like him. When I first saw Sabbath, and then as many times as I had heard those songs up until that point, when they played Iron Man, I mean, I literally got chills and goosebumps because it just sounded so much heavier and fuller live. The way they played that, man, it was even slowed down a little bit on certain parts, but I just remember how freaking impactful that was. And again, I was getting goosebumps, you know, just thinking about it. I still play this album today because it just never gets old. I don't care how many times songs like Iron Man and Paranoid and War Pigs even can be played on the radio. It never gets old to me. Every time I hear it, it's almost, I don't know, like not hearing it for the first time every time I listen to it, but it's just like looking at old pictures, you know. You're never going to get tired of that. It brings back memories, and just, you know, respecting the music that is on there. It's almost like a religious experience in a way.
Master of Reality released in 1971 and was doomier than the previous 2. I mean, this thing is a killer. Many bands would struggle, if be able to at all, release a 3rd album while partying and touring non-stop. One of my favorite tracks on this album is Children of the Grave. The energy is uncontainable, and I just love the drum track overlays. In 2009, they released a deluxe version on CD. It has a really cool bonus disc that has some awesome outtakes on it. Check it out if you get the chance.
If I had to pick 2, I would pick Master Reality and Sabotage were the 2 I would pick. I don't love them. Everybody's got their own favorites though, but those are the 2 I would pick.
Next up is Volume 4, and my friends Scott Waters and Trog are going to weigh in on it.
So everybody, my name is Scott Waters. Welcome to On to Metal, and with me I got
Trog.
We're here to talk about Black Sabbath.
Volume 4.
Volume 4. One of those albums that I just kind of grew up with, you know?
Yep. I remember I bought this one at a local store in Waterville, Maine. It was one of the last ones I got. And I remember I had to ride home in the rain with it under my shirt so it wouldn't get wet on my bicycle. Yeah, Volume 4. And we opened it up and we were like, oh, where's the booklet? I didn't get the booklet one until years later. Really cool shots of the band.
Yeah,
It's Ozzy.
I think when I bought it was in the 80s too, and it didn't have this second section, which is weird because then you don't have you're missing guys.
Yep. It was weird. But anyway, great album.
A cleaner album from Sabbath compared to the first 3. Cleaner as far as production. It was a little smoother.
And a little more progressive, I think, on this one.
Yep.
This was the bridge into Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, where they just got more fancy production-wise.
Exactly.
I think. But what a great record! I can always throw this on, and I just love it.
Yeah, it's still one of my favorites from Sabbath. I mean, it's hard to put them in order, but it would be right up there with Master Reality and
Wheels of Confusion, great long opener, like an 8-minute track. The hits on here were Tomorrow's Dream and Changes, Snowblind, Supernaut, which is kind of like a deeper cut. I loved getting new Sabbath albums because there was always the stuff that wasn't on We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll that was like, oh my god, what a great tune, and Supernaut was one of them. That song
Laguna Sunrise is on there too, right?
Yep, Laguna Sunrise, great acoustic piece.
Which really, because nowadays, you know, it's like almost like a sin to put something like that on a metal record, but Sabbath were doing it constantly.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's what's great about Sabbath.
Little jazz influences.
Oh, yeah. That's what's great about them is they had so much dynamics and there were colors with what they did. It wasn't all aggression and like.
There was that too, but it was
right.
It was a roller coaster of of emotions and sounds. It wasn't just hit you in the face constantly.
Yeah, they balanced it. And then what else? We had a couple of deeper tracks, Cornucopia and St. Vitus Dance. And then FX, which is kind of like the delay pedal on a guitar, and like Tony just flicking the strings, whatever it was.
And then funny enough, the album cover, as simple as it is one of the iconic. It's one
totally.
And it's actually been ripped off and used by many other bands.
Yeah,
I mean, right to the point where they actually used Ozzy on the cover, you know?
And then that last cut on here is Under the Sun, which is another lengthy piece, and it's divided into a couple of movements, like a lot of their stuff is.
Yeah.
But what a great album!
Yep, great album. Yep.
Love it.
Recorded in a haunted castle in Wales, Sabbath released Sabbath Bloody Sabbath in 1973. Rick Wakeman is actually on keyboards on Sabracadabra, which is a really cool connection because many, many years later, his son Adam would work in the studio with Ozzy and then also tours with Ozzy as well. Sabracadabra is also one of my favorite tracks off of that album, and Metallica does a great cover of it on Garage Inc. Sabbath finds a little bit of a harder sound with their 1975 release, Sabotage. Churning out another album a year later, Technical Ecstasy releases in 1976. I read in Tony Iommi's book that they were recording Technical right next door to the Eagles while they were trying to record their album, Hotel California. And I guess Sabbath was being too loud on many occasions and they had to start over and scrap the tape that they had. I thought that was pretty amusing. Never Say Die is really known as Ozzy's last album, and it'll be his last album with Sabbath for 20 years. The album is pretty interesting, a lot of different things going on musically. I do like the album cover art, it's pretty cool. Glad to have this one in my collection, but I don't revisit it a lot. A lot of people thought things were done for Ozzy, and he goes on to really blow everybody's mind when he finds Randy Rhoads and goes on a great solo career, but also some great things up ahead for Black Sabbath when many people thought it was over.
If you look back at the Black Sabbath discography, I don't think there's any more important album or any better album than Heaven and Hell, 1980. It's a 10 from top to bottom, beginning to end. Not a bad song on the whole album. Every song is fantastic. And it's amazing. It's 1980, new singer, and it's like these guys just going into a new decade, just started all over and did it better than they did in the 70s, in my opinion. And I totally love 70s Sabbath, you know, with Ozzy, one of the most recognizable voices in hard rock and metal. But when Dio came in, it was a game changer. I mean, just like 1970 when the self-titled debut came out, it was a game changer. I mean, that's the album for hard rock and metal. To me, that's the album where it just all started, like kind of just popped into existence. Yeah, there was some heaviness leading up to that in the 60s, but nothing like what Sabbath did on that first album. And they slug it out all the way through the 70s, you know, drug problems within the band, Ozzy leaves, and who would have thought, man, you know, pick up Ronnie James Dio.
But then when Dio came on with them, it kind of revitalized it, and they really took off again after that. Of course, he didn't last very long with them, which was a shame. But
and it's 1980, the most important year to me, in my opinion, the most important year in hard rock, heavy metal, just that golden age. It was the beginning of the golden age. It's like the 70s, the heavy 70s was the fuse, and 1980 came along and that was the bomb. It just exploded from that, all that stuff in the 70s. It was, you know, building up and building up. And if you look at the 80s, and 1980 in particular, that year, what came out that year? You know, you have Heaven and Hell, hands down, you know, heavy metal album of the year to me. That was the best release of 1980. But that's going up against British Steel, Back in Black, Ace of Spades, self-titled debut from Iron Maiden and Angel Witch, and two albums from Saxon in 1980. You know, and that caused that flood of new wave of British heavy metal that would that would come, But Heaven and Hell, again, it's top to bottom a 10. Every song's a 10. It's the greatest Black Sabbath album of all time, and it doesn't have Ozzy on it. And I don't care. Again, I love the Ozzy stuff. It's fantastic. It's important. But Dio stepped in. It went up a notch. It became epic with that Dio style. He was taking you on journeys at every song. It still had that darkness to it, but he was taking you places, within that darkness, whatever you want to say. It's just the album's a 10.
And right in between Heaven and Hell and Born Again is the second Dio album of Sabbath, Mob Rules. And really, it feels like Heaven and Hell Part 2, but it's just another great 80s metal album. Dio brings his power, his vocals, and a fresh sound, and Iommi just seems to just play back and forth great with him. Really like this album, and I really like the song on side 2, Falling Off the Edge of the World. I might have to go play that song as soon as I'm done recording this video. So for whatever reason, Dio leaves Sabbath and takes Vinny with him. The next 2 albums have 2 very unlikely singers that you really have a hard time picturing with Black Sabbath. Ian Gillan and then also Glenn Hughes. Greeno has some comments to say about Ian Gillan and Born Again.
Born Again from 1983. Kind of the unwanted stepchild of the Black Sabbath discography. Kind of their what the hell moment, I guess. Right down to the album cover. I mean, it's just, whacked out cover. Really, really eye-catching. Doesn't get a lot of love, but I think it's a fantastic album. It's an odd album. You got Ian Gillan coming in, singer from Deep Purple with Black Sabbath. I mean, come on. That's like, I don't know, Robert Plant singing for AC/DC or something crazy. But it's a fantastic album. It's not a 10 by any means, but overall in the Black Sabbath discography, it kind of stands alone. It has its own thing, and it was a one-off. Ian Gillan comes in, does this one album, they do a short tour, and he's gone.
And then I saw Sabbath, Purple Sabbath. I saw them at Hera Arena. I guess that was a rare treat because they kicked Ian Gillan out of there right after that. That was a real short run of a concert series, and they had this like giant Stonehenge stage work and everything, and boy, I was like from here to the wall to that one. It was a festival seating. You could go right up front if you wanted to.
Because I've never quite understood the term acid rock. I know it was used for a short time there, talking about, heavy hard rock in the 70s or, late 60s, whatever. But I never quite understood why they called that music acid rock. But to me, this is a true acid rock album. Just the sound of it. Iommi's guitars sound different. His guitar work sounds different on this album. His tone. It's more high-endy, a little more fuzzy, not as beefy. The album overall is kind of that way. It almost has a kind of a thin sound to it without being totally thin. But there's this weird, different sound to this album. And there's some really killer tracks on the album, like Digital Bitch, Trashed, Zero the Hero. It's a good album, and it gets overlooked. It gets kind of made fun of when they're talking about, different eras of Sabbath. But I think it deserves better. Again, it's not a 10. It's not on the level of the debut or Heaven and Hell. But it doesn't deserve what it gets. It doesn't deserve what people say about it. I think it's, give it another shot. Think of it differently. And just the fact that you have Ian Gillan singing with Black Sabbath is a mind blower. Born Again, it's a great album.